Derek Bodner, Philly Mag, of course, covers the 76ers. We'll get details on the Sixers just about 28 minutes away from the trade deadline, and he'll join us now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. What's going on, Derek? How you been, pal?
Not much. Doing good.
Well, you can't take a break, right? Hankey's always working. Is it Hankey or Colangelo? Who's working more?
Well, I'd say they're both working, but I think general consensus is that Colangelo has the louder voice, if you will, in the front office.
All right, and it's funny because I did read some reports that people have been calling Colangelo. Now Colangelo has come out and said Sam is working the channels. Who knows here? But did you think that regardless of who is got the louder voice, that one guy would prefer trading Okafor or Noel over the other guy, or do you believe that the organization is on the same page with those two guys?
No, I think they're probably mostly on the same page, at least at this stage, in what they want to do. I always got the feeling that unless they were absolutely blown away by what was offered, that they weren't going to be active in that regard, and specifically talking about those two players, at the trade deadline. I think they want to wait and see what happens with the lottery, wait and see what happens to Embiid, and perhaps most importantly, just wait and see how the final, 2+ months of the season play out before they really have to make a decision on which, if they do have to make a decision, I think they just want more information before they do. And I never felt like the trade deadline was the most likely situation for that to happen.
Derek, can you explain for the listeners a deal that might involve the Sixers but doesn't really involve the Sixers and how they could prosper between the Kings and the Bulls?
Yeah, well, basically the Kings owe the Bulls a protected pick. If it falls outside of the top 10 in this draft, they get it. Otherwise, they can get it next year if, once again, it falls outside of the top 10 in the 2017 draft. The Kings then went and traded the rights to swap picks with the Sixers. Again, the Sixers have the right to swap picks in both 2016 and 2017, but that pick has to fall now inside the top 10, basically if it doesn't go to Chicago. Part of the package that Sacramento was talking about giving to Chicago to try to get Pau Gasol away was to decrease those protections. So right now Sacramento is, I think, the 9th worst record in the league. They wanted to bump that down to, say, maybe top 6 protected. But in order to do that, they had to get approval from the Sixers and basically make it a 3-team deal because they had already essentially traded away the right to that pick if it falls in the top 10. So that's pretty much how the Sixers have, kind of wormed their way into this discussion. But, yeah, that's basically the gist of it.
So they've added to the fleecing of the Sacramento Kings that they got the last time, and now they potentially could be adding more to that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And there's a little bit of a concern from the Sixers' perspective, or at least there could be a little bit of concern, because basically the Sixers are then owed a future first-round pick from Sacramento. Not a pick swap now, but an actual outright pick. And that comes into play if, basically 2 years after the Kings' debt is paid to Chicago. So if it's more likely to convey now, the Sixers are more likely to get that pick in 2018 rather than 2019, but the thing is it becomes unprotected if it waits until 2019. So there might be a little bit of a desire for the Sixers to do whatever they can to make sure that pick comes over in 2019 when it's unprotected. But, yeah, I mean, they basically can negotiate their way into getting a free asset just by that inclusion of that pick swap.
Derek Bodner, Philly Mag, of course, trade deadline. Reports that the Sixers have listened to offers but not inclined to trade Okafor or Noel, barring a, quote, overwhelming offer, Derek. In your mind, does an overwhelming offer even exist for one of those two guys? What type of player, what kind of name do you envision that the Sixers would say yes to for one of those guys?
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly if an offer comes in that is overwhelming, it's going to involve a star player who is, pretty much what Okafor or Noel could become, or at least close to their upside, but has already reached that point and is maybe unhappy with where they are or needs a change of scenery. Something like Blake Griffin. But the problem becomes that you can't, Blake Griffin can become a free agent in a year and a half or a little over a year, and convincing him to sign with the Sixers long-term is always going to be difficult for the stage that they're at. So I think having a situation come up where you can get the kind of talent that the Sixers want, but also still have the realistic chance of signing that talent to a long-term contract, I think that's very unlikely.
Derek Bodner with us says the Sixers searching for potentially ways to get better. They probably would wait to the offseason in this situation, but if the right deal for Okafor comes out there, how much do you think an Okafor deal is really kind of tied to Embiid? Like, if they trade Okafor, does that put your mind at ease at all on Joel Embiid?
No, I don't think there's really a whole lot they can do right now to put your mind at ease on Joel Embiid until he gets on the court and really plays, not only plays 5-on-5 in the offseason or plays in summer league or plays for a month in the season, until he's really healthy for a full year, 2 years, 3 years, and doesn't have any recurrence with these navicular bone problems. I don't think any real bravado or even a vote of confidence like a trade would be. I don't think that can really, quell any concerns.
Any thoughts on some minor deals? Are there guys other than the two big names, Derek, that, because they have such big names on this team, that are not getting publicized as much? I saw Kendall Marshall's name yesterday. Alex Kennedy joined us and talked about Carl Landry might be an attractive name to other teams. Do you, Robert Covington, any possibilities on those guys?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was reported earlier that the Bucks were talking about reacquiring Kendall Marshall last year. It doesn't look like that's going to come to fruition, but certainly a more veteran guy like Marshall, like Carl Landry, like you said, those are always options. I do think Landry's, he's owed $6.5 million guaranteed next year. I think that's a little bit of a hindrance. But yeah, I mean, there's always room for minor deal. I still think if they do make a deal that isn't a major deal, that doesn't involve Jahlil Okafor or Nerlens Noel, I think the most likely asset to be traded is their cap space. There have been a number of trades today to, basically where the Portland Trailblazers act as a facilitator to take on Anderson Varejão's contract and get a draft pick back in return. The Heat have made a couple of moves to limit their luxury tax bill. I think if the Sixers do get involved with something here over the next 20 minutes, and it's important to remember that the deadline, 3 p.m. isn't necessarily a strict deadline. As long as a deal is in discussion, they are allowed to go over that deadline to iron out the details. But if something happens in the next 20 minutes, I think the cap space is probably the most likely thing the Sixers will give up.
Derek, you've watched these guys all year long. In your opinion, is trading Okafor the right move? Can you surmise at this point, look, I've watched these guys, they just can't coexist. If you get something of equal value, that yes, indeed, trading Okafor is a smart move.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you can get equal value and maybe another young player who maybe plays a more position of need, I think you have to consider it. I do think that ultimately, one of these two guys, Nerlens Noel and Jahlil Okafor, is eventually going to be traded. And I think that's almost irrespective of what happens with Embiid, because I just don't think that they fit. And maybe you give them a little bit more time to see if one of them can grow their game enough where it could fit. Maybe you see if, Nerlens Noel can be that impact defender at the 4, or Jahlil Okafor can get in better shape and move his feet. But I think ultimately, within the next 12 months, 18 months, one of those two guys is going to be traded. It just comes down to when you have enough information to really make a determination on which one you want to keep and build around, and when their value is going to be the highest. And I'm just not convinced that right now is that time.
All right, Derek. So 20 minutes from now, does something get done between those two guys, or it is a complete long shot?
I would say it's a long shot.
All right, we'll keep our eye on Okafor and, of course, Noel. I don't know which one. I feel like I think Noel would be the guy I'd rather keep, just basing that on, Embiid's skill set, him being a defensive presence. But who knows? We'll see which guy has more value around the league to other teams. I guess it really depends on the team. If you're Boston, Derek, they're looking for rim protection. They probably would be a team that might be interested in Noel's skill set.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's been, for what they've accomplished defensively, Boston, with the lack of rim protection that they have, it's kind of scary, and you give Brad Stevens a lot of credit for that, but you do kind of wonder what they would be able to do if they had a rim protector like Noel. But they were also rumored to be interested in Jahlil Okafor at the draft last year. So they're they're a team that could at one point come up in conversations for both of those big men, and they're certainly a team that's very desirous right now to make a big move like that.
And they have a bundle of draft picks, including one that could be a top 5 selection as well. Derek Bodner, Philly Mag, of course, has the NBA trade deadline. You got to follow at Derek Bodner NBA. All right, Derek. Thanks, pal.
Thank you.